On December 11th, 1978, at New York's John F. Kennedy Airport, a crime was committed that would change the world of organized crime forever. But what seemed like the perfect heist, with millions of dollars stolen in broad daylight, would soon spiral into a bloodbath that no one expected. This is the chilling story of the Lufthansa Heist murders. It was a cold winter's night, December 11th, 1978. The kind of night that seemed quiet on the surface, but hid danger just beneath it. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, one of the most ambitious and brazen crimes in American history was about to unfold. The plan was a simple one: get in, take the money, and get out. But as with all great heists, simplicity often masks a complex web of deception, secrecy, and betrayal. This wasn't just any money. It was a fortune in cash, jewelry, and diamonds, all waiting to be shipped out of the country. And the crew behind this heist wasn't just any group of criminals. They were seasoned mobsters with connections deep inside the city's underworld. James Burke, the leader of this operation, was no stranger to crime. A member of the Lucchese crime family, Burke was known for his brutal efficiency and his ability to keep his operations under wraps. His nickname, the Gent, was ironically given due to his methodical, almost polite demeanor, until, of course, he needed to get his hands dirty. Burke had orchestrated everything down to the finest detail, and this time, the score would be huge. But Burke wasn't alone. This wasn't just one man's operation. He had a trusted crew, each with a specific role. These are not first-time robbers. They were men who had spent years building reputations in the world of crime. Their names weren't as well known as Burke's, but they were just as dangerous. A man named Henry Hill, later to become infamous for his involvement in the Lucchese family, described Burke's crew as the kind of men who could get the job done without anyone noticing. Among them was Tommy, the Greek Darko, an expert in logistics and timing, and Lenny the Hammer McBratney, known for his muscle and ability to keep things under control when the heat came down. Together, they made up the core of Burke's crew. It was a cold winter's night, December 11th, 1978. The kind of night that seemed quiet on the surface, but hid danger just beneath it. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, one of the most ambitious and brazen crimes in American history was about to unfold. The plan was a simple one: get in, take the money, and get out. But as with all great heists, simplicity often masks a complex web of deception, secrecy, and betrayal. This wasn't just any money. It was a fortune in cash, jewelry, and diamonds, all waiting to be shipped out of the country. And the crew behind this heist wasn't just any group of criminals. They were seasoned mobsters with connections deep inside the city's underworld. James Burke, the leader of this operation, was no stranger to crime. A member of the Lucchese crime family, Burke was known for his brutal efficiency and his ability to keep his operations under wraps. His nickname, the Gent, was ironically given due to his methodical, almost polite demeanor, until, of course, he needed to get his hands dirty. Burke had orchestrated everything down to the finest detail, and this time, the score would be huge. But Burke wasn't alone. This wasn't just one man's operation. He had a trusted crew, each with a specific role. These are not first-time robbers. They were men who had spent years building reputations in the world of crime. Their names weren't as well known as Burke's, but they were just as dangerous. A man named Henry Hill, later to become infamous for his involvement in the Lucchese family, described Burke's crew as the kind of men who could get the job done without anyone noticing. Among them was Tommy, the Greek Darko, an expert in logistics and timing, and Lenny the Hammer McBratney, known for his muscle and ability to keep things under control when the heat came down. Together, they made up the core of Burke's crew. Each had a specific role to play, and each was prepared to do whatever was necessary to make sure the heist went off without a hitch. For this job, inside information was everything. The thieves knew exactly when the money would be available, how much it would weigh, and where the most vulnerable parts of the airport security system were. Burke had an insider, Louis Big Lou Monty, a well-placed worker in the Lufthansa cargo department. Monty knew the ropes and could provide the crew with the critical details: which flights were carrying the goods, which areas were poorly guarded, and when security would be at its weakest. Monty's role was pivotal. Without him, the heist would have been nearly impossible. He was their eyes and ears inside the cargo terminal. Through him, the thieves learned about the exact timing of shipments, which specific containers held the valuables, and even the weaknesses in the security system. Burke knew they had to act fast, and they did. The night was cold, the perfect cover for an operation like this. The crew arrived at JFK dressed as airport workers, blending in with the dozens of staff members who were busy handling luggage and cargo. They carried no weapons that were visible, their tools hidden beneath layers of work clothes. The plan was simple: move fast, stay quiet, and take the cash before anyone even realized what was happening. As the crew entered the cargo hold, they knew they had one shot at this. The bags of cash and jewels were packed tightly in containers, waiting to be flown out. The thieves had one major advantage: they had the exact location of the stash and the timing of the shipment. There was no second chance. In total, the thieves took over $5 million, equivalent to more than $20 million in today's money. They worked with the precision of a well-oiled machine. No noise, no distractions, just the sound of heavy duffel bags being zipped up and moved out. The thieves knew that time was their enemy. Every second that passed increased the likelihood of them being caught. With the loot in hand, the crew had to make their escape. The getaway was just as planned, flawless. As quickly as they arrived, the thieves vanished into the night, slipping through the cracks of the airport like shadows. The getaway vehicles were already waiting for them in a secluded part of the airport, out of sight of the security cameras. In under 30 minutes, the team was gone, leaving only a faint trail of tire tracks in the snow. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the thieves were long gone. The money, the diamonds, and the jewelry were already being shuffled through underground networks, far beyond the reach of the law. The perfect crime, or so it seemed. But what the criminals didn't realize was that this crime, which they believed to be their biggest success, would soon trigger a wave of violence, betrayal, and death. For the Lufthansa heist wasn't just a robbery. It was the beginning of a bloodbath that no one could have predicted. When the heist was completed, it seemed like a flawless victory. The perfect crime. The crew had done their part. The loot was in their hands. But what they didn't know was that the consequences of their actions were far from over. The moment the money disappeared, the blood began to flow. And the first victim was the man who thought he could control everything. James "Jimmy" Burke had always been a man who liked to keep things close to the chest. As a seasoned Mafia boss, he understood the value of loyalty and the cost of betrayal. But in the world of organized crime, even the most carefully laid plans can be shattered by a single mistake. One of the first and most significant blows came when Burke's most trusted inside man, Louis Big Lou Monty, was found dead. Monty, a cargo worker at JFK, had provided critical information about the heist, the exact time and place the loot would be moved. Burke trusted him implicitly, but it seems that loyalty in the world of the Mafia is never guaranteed. Monty's role in the heist was pivotal. Without him, the thieves would never have known the exact time of the shipment, the location of the cash, or even the route security would take. He was more than an informant. He was Burke's man on the inside. But by the end of December, Monty's luck ran out. His body was found in a parked car just outside a Queens nightclub, the apparent victim of a brutal execution-style murder. Some believed it was a botched robbery. Others suspected a drug deal gone wrong. But those who knew the Mafia knew better. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a hit. Burke knew that anyone who could tie him to the heist had to be silenced. Monty had played a role in this heist. That alone was enough to seal his fate. Monty wasn't the last to be silenced. In the months that followed, a series of brutal murders began to unfold. One by one, members of Burke's crew and anyone who knew too much began disappearing. There were accidents, there were suicides, and above all, there were hits. But the truth behind these killings was far darker than anyone could have imagined. The next target was Richard "Mickey" Delia a longtime associate of Burke who had helped coordinate the heist. Delia, like Monty, had critical information. He had witnessed too much. His body was found in an alley, shot multiple times at close range. The authorities quickly labeled it a mob hit, but no one had the guts to follow the trail any deeper. The Mafia was ruthless, and they didn't leave witnesses. Delia was the first of many to fall. And soon, it wasn't just members of the crew that were dying. Even the most peripheral figures associated with the heist, those who were involved in any way, shape, or form, began to drop like flies. It was clear. Burke's men were working hard to cover their tracks, and they weren't leaving anything to chance. The deaths weren't just limited to the crew. In the following months, more associates, acquaintances, and even family members of those involved in the heist would be found dead. The killings escalated, and the streets of New York became a battleground for survival. For some, it was a lucky accident, for others, a violent confrontation. But for all, it was clear. Those who knew too much about the Lufthansa heist had to pay the price. Each murder was a calculated message, a warning to anyone who thought they could betray Burke. In the criminal world, silence was the price of survival, and those who didn't obey were swiftly removed. The message couldn't be clearer: stay quiet, or else. Despite the growing body count, the authorities were no closer to finding the mastermind behind the Lufthansa heist. The FBI had picked up the trail, but the Mafia's influence over New York was vast, and their reach extended deep into every layer of law enforcement. Every lead seemed to disappear. Every witness either vanished or died before they could speak. But the FBI kept digging, determined to crack the case and bring the criminals to justice. As the bodies continued to pile up, it became evident that the authorities were dealing with something far larger than a simple robbery. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about a hidden world of mob power and influence. And for Burke, the heat was beginning to turn up. While Burke and his crew had been successful in erasing their tracks, their luck was beginning to run out. With so many bodies piling up, someone was bound to crack under pressure. And even the most cold-blooded mafia, Don, couldn't stay in control forever. The murders had spiraled out of control. Burke's plan to eliminate anyone who could connect him to the heist had worked too well. The people involved in the heist were slowly disappearing, but as the heat intensified, so did the pressure. Burke, who had once controlled everything with a calm, almost detached demeanor, was starting to realize that his empire was crumbling. As Burke's grip on the operation loosened, the inevitable happened. One by one, the crew members involved in the Lufthansa heist began to crack. And soon, the darkest secrets of the heist, and the murders that followed, would begin to unravel. But who would be left to tell the tale? By the late 1970s, New York City had become a hotbed for organized crime. The Five Families, powerful mafia factions that controlled much of the city's underground activities, held their sway over everything from racketeering to the drug trade. But with the fallout from the Lufthansa heist leaving a trail of bodies behind, the city's crime syndicates were facing an unprecedented level of scrutiny. The walls were closing in, and for Burke and his crew, the pressure was mounting. For months, the bodies kept piling up, but it wasn't just the mob's enforcers doing the work anymore. Law enforcement agencies like the FBI were now deeply involved, trying to crack the case. As Burke's trusted associates disappeared, the question remained: who would break first? And would the truth of the heist ever come to light? The FBI knew they had a major case on their hands. The Lufthansa heist wasn't just about the millions of dollars stolen. It was about power, betrayal, and bloodshed. But the investigation had stalled. Every lead either turned cold or led straight into a wall of silence. The Mafia's influence over law enforcement, combined with a strict code of silence, omerta, kept anyone with information from talking. At the heart of the investigation was the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force, led by a group of relentless investigators determined to crack the case wide open. They pieced together evidence, tracked down witnesses, and relentlessly pursued leads. But every time they thought they were close to a breakthrough, a new death or a new lead would lead them down another dead end. One of the key players in the unfolding drama was Henry Hill, a low-ranking member of the Lucchese crime family. Hill had been involved in the heist itself, but his true significance lay in the fact that, years later, he would become one of the most important informants in the Mafia's history. His decision to cooperate with the FBI would shake the foundations of the criminal world and ultimately bring down Burke's empire. Hill had witnessed the murder and mayhem surrounding the heist and its aftermath. But more importantly, he knew about the inner workings of the Lucchese family, how they operated, who was involved, and the secrets that had been buried beneath layers of Mafia power. Hill's testimony would soon become a turning point in the investigation. In the fall of 1979, Henry Hill was ready to talk. What he revealed would rock the FBI to its core. Burke, the man who had masterminded the heist, was not just a criminal kingpin. He was a cold-blooded killer. Burke had been responsible for silencing anyone who could tie him to the crime, and his reach extended deep into the ranks of the Mafia, all the way up to the top echelons of the Lucchese family. Hill told authorities that Burke had orchestrated the murders of not just the crew members involved in the heist, but anyone who might have had critical information. The more Hill revealed, the clearer it became. Burke was a man who would stop at nothing to cover his tracks, and the hit list was far longer than anyone had realized. For the Lucchese family and their associates, silence wasn't just a matter of honor, it was a matter of survival. The Mafia ran on loyalty, but loyalty had its price. For those like Hill, who chose to cooperate with the authorities, the consequences were clear. The Mafia had a long history of revenge, and those who betrayed their own would pay a heavy toll. Yet Hill was willing to risk everything to expose the truth. The Mafia's grip on New York had been tight, but cracks were starting to form. Hill's willingness to testify was a direct challenge to that power. For Burke, the noose was tightening. But it wasn't just Burke's associates that were in danger. It was anyone who had even the slightest connection to the heist. And when Hill finally made the decision to turn informant, the stakes were raised to a whole new level. With Hill's testimony, the FBI was finally able to connect the dots. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and Burke was no longer untouchable. They had the evidence they needed to bring him to trial. But even as the investigation progressed, the Mafia was working to undermine it from every angle. Burke, however, wasn't going down without a fight. He continued to exert control from the shadows, using his Mafia connections to delay and thwart the investigation. But the authorities, armed with Hill's inside information, began to make major strides. In early 1980, the FBI gathered enough evidence to arrest Burke. But it wasn't just Hill's testimony that sealed his fate. A network of wiretaps, surveillance, and informants helped build a rock-solid case against him. But there was one last betrayal that would change everything. Burke's own men began to turn on him. As more members of Burke's crew turned on him, the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The arrests began. Burke's empire was on the verge of collapsing. But while some criminals went down with him, others still slipped through the cracks. By the time Burke was arrested, the damage had already been done. The stolen money was still unaccounted for, and the murders were far from over. As the investigation unfolded, new questions arose. Who was really behind the order to kill all those involved? And would the truth about the stolen money ever be revealed? Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking conclusion to the Lufthansa Heist murders. By the early 1980s, the Lufthansa Heist had become a symbol of both criminal genius and catastrophic failure. For those who survived the aftermath, the road ahead was nothing but a relentless descent into chaos. For James "Jimmy" Burke, the man behind the heist, the end seemed inevitable. The Mafia's grip on New York was loosening, but the lingering question remained. Where was the stolen money? Was it buried somewhere, never to be found, or had it vanished into the shadowy depths of the criminal underworld? In 1985, after years of silence, the final chapter of the Lufthansa heist would be written in blood. Burke was now behind bars, but his legacy, like the stolen millions, remained a shadow over the city. Despite Burke's arrest, the Lucchese family, like all the Mafia families of New York, remained a powerful force in the city's underground economy. The Mafia's reach extended far beyond Burke's empire, and those left standing in his wake were intent on maintaining the family's power. The stolen money was gone, but its influence still loomed large. Some believed it was hidden away, waiting to be uncovered. Others thought it was laundered through secret channels. As the years passed, whispers continued to circulate about the Lufthansa money. Some claimed it was buried deep beneath the streets of New York, waiting to be discovered. Others believed that the Mafia had laundered it through gambling rings, shady casinos, and crooked businesses. But in reality, the money was likely gone forever, hidden somewhere that no one could find it. While Burke's arrest had dismantled his immediate criminal empire, the one mystery that continued to haunt investigators was the fate of the stolen money. Despite numerous leads, no one was ever able to trace the Lufthansa loot to its final destination. Some said it was hidden in a warehouse. Others suggested it was buried in an undisclosed location. For all their efforts, the authorities were never able to recover a single dime of the stolen fortune. To this day, the stolen $5 million remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Its disappearance is part of the tragic irony of the Lufthansa Heist, a crime that seems so perfect, yet left behind so many questions unanswered. As for Henry Hill, the man who had turned against his Mafia family to bring down Burke, his life would never be the same. Once a loyal member of the Lucchese family, Hill's decision to testify against the mob placed him in an entirely new world, a world of constant fear, relocation, and the heavy burden of knowing he had betrayed those closest to him. After testifying, Hill entered the Witness Protection Program, where he was given a new name, a new life, and the constant fear that the Mafia would come for him. The life of a Mafia informant was never easy, and for Hill, it was a constant struggle to stay alive. His decision to turn on the mob, to betray the men who had once been his family, came at a great personal cost. As for Jimmy Burke, the orchestrator of the Lufthansa heist, his fate came much later than many expected. He spent nearly a decade in prison for unrelated crimes before finally being convicted for his role in the murder of a fellow mobster, William "Billy" Batts, who had crossed him years earlier. But Burke never faced justice for his role in the heist itself. He died in prison in 1996, having never revealed what truly happened to the stolen millions. Burke's death in 1996 marked the final chapter of the Lufthansa heist for many. But for those still seeking justice, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Burke had never spoken of the heist in full, and the location of the stolen money remained a mystery until his last breath.